Hello everyone, thank you for clicking to watch this video. This is Get Ready and Get Weird with Marcella. I am Marcella. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have you here. I enjoy talking about strange things. Strange is relative, but I enjoy talking about usually natural kind of sciencey things that we share this planet with that we maybe wouldn't talk about on a daily basis. I also enjoy putting makeup on my face. So I created this channel to have a get ready with me style video while we have a conversation about something weird. Today we are talking about sea anemones. Sea anemones was a suggestion by my brilliant friend Emily in Kansas. I'm always happy to hear her suggestions. She is also a lover of having weird conversations, which is why we're friends. One of the reasons why we're friends. So thank you, Emily, as always, for this suggestion. Today we will talk about the anatomy of a sea anemone. We will talk about the symbiotic relationships that they have with different species that you may not expect. We will also talk about their diet and then some fun facts. I usually try to throw in some fun facts that I found out during my research at the end of the conversation. And then I will be doing this makeup look while we chat. So I tried to do a little bit of colorful because sea anemones are very colorful and they can be a range of colors. So I tried to do multiple colors and then a kind of bright lip, but nothing too crazy. I also wore flowers because sea anemones are named after the terrestrial flower called anemones. So if you are familiar with one anemone or the other, they are completely different. So stay tuned and learn about the sea version of the anemone. Anyway, I'm so glad that you clicked to watch this video. Thank you so much. Please hit subscribe if you've been enjoying my videos. And with all of that being said, let's jump into a conversation about sea anemones while I put makeup on my face. Hello everyone, I'm here with my clean face, ready to talk to you all about sea anemones. Sea anemones are named after a flashy flower that you can find here on land, and they're also called anemones. They are sometimes called flowers, but they're actually closely related to jellyfish as well as corals. When I think of sea anemones, I honestly first think of Finding Nemo. In Finding Nemo, you learn that clownfish live in anemones, which we will talk about soon. It's kind of a cute memory because Nemo has a hard time saying the word anemone.
Okay, don't hurt yourself.
Even though he lives in an anemone. So just like the jellyfish that they are related to, sea anemones are actually a stinging polyp. The little floaty things that we see Nemo living in Finding Nemo are actually tentacles that can sting prey or predators. If they're trying to ward predators off, they could sting them as well. The tentacles also kind of reach out and grab prey or food for the anemone to eat. Anemone are carnivores. I feel like it's pretty obvious, but they are invertebrates, so no spine. I often think of anemones as sedentary. They stay in one spot. Sometimes they look like a plant, hence being named for a flower, a terrestrial flower. But the truth is, they are technically able to move very slowly, but they do spend most of their life stuck to one spot, kind of just reaching their tentacles out to gather food, living in a symbiotic relationship with different animals in their habitat. There are over 1,000 different species of sea anemones. Some have adapted to live in Arctic waters, but most of the anemones in the ocean live near the equator, so in more tropical waters, warmer waters. And they can live pretty deep in the ocean, but there are some that live near the coast. And there's one anemone that I found that could actually live on the shore when the tide was low And the way that they survive is by sucking their tentacles in, like kind of like folding themselves in on themselves. Then that was called the beadlet anemone. And so they're pretty small, but they can be seen actually outside of the ocean when the tide is low. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of these creatures while I get my eyeshadow ready. Thinking colorful because sea anemones can be all different kinds of colors. So I feel like we should pay tribute to that. Maybe we could do like a teal to purple to maroon. I might be biting off more than I should, but we're gonna try it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of these creatures. So these creatures can be very small as 1/2 inch to as large as 6 feet across. So a wide array of sizes, a wide array of colors. They have a adhesive petal disc, which allows them to stick to rocks or surfaces, but also is their mode of transportation. They can slide it. It's sometimes called their foot. So their base is also their foot, but it also sticks them to rocks. One-footed, like a unicycle of the sea. On their base, then is their cylindrical body, and their mouth is in the center. Around their mouth is tentacles sticking up, and those tentacles are how they gather food out of the water. Their tentacles are triggered by touch, and they fire a harpoon-like filament into their victim, which can paralyze them. It paralyzes them. It injects a neurotoxin and paralyzes their victim, which then allows their tentacles to grab their victim and push it towards its mouth, its centralized mouth. So much more intriguing than I thought this sea anemone would be. I truly thought sea anemones just kind of sat there. I don't know what I thought they ate, honestly. I didn't think about it. So now that we know about their anatomy, let's talk a little bit about the symbiotic relationships that a sea anemone would be a part of. A symbiotic relationship is a relationship between two animals that is mutually beneficial to both of them. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You know, you're both gonna get something out of living in this symbiotic relationship. One symbiotic relationship that a sea anemone might have is with green algae. And the green algae is able to live in the tentacles of the sea anemone, which is a safe place for it to live, where it has access to sunlight, and it's just a safe spot for them to live and grow and be merry. So that's the benefit that the algae gets. The benefit that the sea anemone gets is that it's actually able to use some of the energy, oxygen, and sugar that the green algae gets from the sun through photosynthesis. So I find it a little bit intriguing that while sea anemones are animals, not plants, and they are carnivores and get its energy through a carnivorous diet, it can also gather some energy through photosynthesis in a way via a symbiotic relationship with green algae. Another symbiotic relationship that many of us might be more familiar with than the green algae relationship is their symbiotic relationship with the clownfish. So like I mentioned, when I think of sea anemones, I normally think of the movie Finding Nemo. And in Finding Nemo, we know that Nemo and his clownfish family live in a sea anemone. Now, this is real, this is true. Pixar didn't lie to us. Clownfish can live. They do have a symbiotic relationship with sea anemones. And what's very intriguing is that these symbiotic relationships are so specialized that a specific species of clownfish must live with a specific species of sea anemone. Otherwise, the symbiotic relationship won't work. So how this symbiotic relationship works is that the sea anemone will not sting the clownfish. So the clownfish can live in its tentacles. And just in case an accidental sting does happen, clownfish, they are covered in a thin layer of mucus on their body that protects them from being stung. So we know that clownfish can live in a sea anemone. Their benefit of this symbiotic relationship is that they have a safe place to live within the sea anemone, and the tentacles cannot hurt them, but will keep other predators away and keeps their home safe and just for that specific clownfish. What's the benefit that the sea anemone gets though? So the sea anemone is able to eat leftovers from a clownfish's meal. Clownfish also help to deter predators of the sea anemone from coming and eating the sea anemone. So they protect their home, which is actually the sea anemone, and in turn then protecting the sea anemone. As I mentioned before, it's a very specific symbiotic relationship. This specific kind of clownfish can only live in this specific kind of sea anemone. Out of the thousands of species of sea anemones, there's only 10 that house clownfish. And within those 10, it's a specific kind of sea anemone that a specific kind of clownfish can live in. It's a very specialized relationship. Another thing that clownfish do is help keep parasites and such out of the sea anemone, so keeping it clean between the tentacles and such. So bonus, no parasites. All right, let's talk a little bit about the diet of sea anemones. Sea anemones are carnivorous. They eat mollusks, small fish, crustaceans, and even sometimes sea urchins. Now, I mentioned that some sea anemones can be up to 6 feet across. So larger sea anemones can eat larger prey, as you would figure. So some of the larger sea anemones can actually eat starfish as well as whole jellyfish. So pretty big. They could just grab some big stuff, some big fish, some big jellyfish, some big starfish out of the ocean with using their large tentacles. So depending on the size, of course, depends on what their diet consists of, but they are carnivorous and eat other fish and other just kind of crumbs floating through the sea. So if a clownfish lives in their tentacles, they will eat leftovers from the clownfish, whatever kind of falls out while they're eating. So they have a very broad diet. All right, so we've covered the anatomy, symbiotic relationships, and the diet of the sea anemone. So let's talk a little bit about some of the fun facts that I found while researching for this video. One of the fun facts is that sea anemones can actually reproduce both sexually and asexually. There's many different ways that a sea anemone might reproduce. If they reproduce sexually, they give birth through their mouth, because another fun fact is that their mouth is also their bottom. So everything goes in and out of the mouth, including their baby. So if they do reproduce sexually, their baby will be born via their centralized mouth. If they reproduce asexually, there are a few different ways that that can also happen. They can clone themselves, which is one reason why they can live so long. They can also stretch, grow really long, and then separate into two separate sea anemones. They can sprout, similarly to if you're familiar with like a spider plant. They can like grow another anemone as a bud, and that bud will break off to form a separate anemone. Now, in the sexual reproduction that I mentioned earlier, they do need both a male and a female sea anemone. In the asexual reproduction, they don't need the opposite sex, so they can just be themselves, reproduce. Some of them can reproduce by just breaking a piece off of themselves, and then there will grow another sea anemone. That's a little bit different than growing a bud, because growing the bud means that they kind of grow a little tiny sea anemone on them, and then that sea anemone breaks off. But they can also asexually reproduce by breaking a piece off of them that was not a bud, which is pretty cool. Some sea anemones do glow fluorescent green under a ultraviolet light, which is, to me, that's not really surprising. I feel like I assume that lots of sea creatures kind of are fluorescent. Maybe that's just a weird assumption that I imagine the underwater being some magical place, but to me it seems like that's how it would be, is glowy. Mentioned that sea anemones, because of their ability to clone themselves, they live for a long time. Sea anemones can live 60 to 80 years, which is, in my opinion, a very long time to live. So 60 to 80 years, and as I mentioned, because sea anemones can clone themselves, technically some of them can live indefinitely because they wouldn't age. If you're able to clone yourself, you wouldn't necessarily have to age. And they technically could live indefinitely without predators or disease to worry about. So, fountain of youth over here. Come take a look. Something else I learned about sea anemones is that because of the popularity of the clownfish and sea anemone symbiotic relationship, I'm assuming from the Finding Nemo franchise, is that many aquariums, and even so like city aquariums as well as personal aquariums, so anybody who has their own private aquarium, they've been very interested in having a pair, a clownfish and sea anemone pair. Sea anemones can be kept in a saltwater aquarium for a seasoned aquarium keeper. So I don't know how. I've never had an aquarium, so I'm not an expert in aquariums by any means, but I think that having an anemone in captivity should be left to someone who has done their research and probably kept aquariums for quite some time. I also think, or I do know, I saw in my research that you should verify if you're going to have an anemone in your aquarium, you should verify that that anemone was captive bred. You don't want to be taking anemones out of the ocean to then be kept in an aquarium. That just doesn't seem like the go. And again, because these sea anemones and clownfish are so specialized, you just need to make sure, or anyone who plans on getting a sea anemone needs to make sure that you know that you're getting the right pair. You don't want to get a sea anemone and a clownfish and then they're not the right ones to live together, and you have a sad clownfish with no habitat and a sea anemone without a buddy. I don't think they care about having a buddy, but it's just something to consider because they are so specialized. You just don't want to be getting it because you think it's cool or trendy or cute. You have to remember when you're thinking about these kinds of things, and this is with any pet or animal that you plan to keep, whether that's a dog, cat, anything, just be sure that before you jump into having a pet or keeping an animal because it would look cool or it'd be cute on your Instagram or it would be fun to watch, you just have to make sure that you're sourcing them ethically and you know what you're getting into. Do the research that it takes to care for an animal like this. Do the research that it takes to understand their diet, their life, because I did read that while yes, sea anemones can be kept in an aquarium, in a private aquarium, they're not technically domesticated, so they could sting you. You just need to know what you're getting yourself into. So I'll jump off my soapbox on that because like I mentioned before I jumped on the soapbox, I am not an expert in aquarium keeping. So those are my 2 cents from a non-expert. But this is the completed look for sea anemones. I tried to add some bright colors on my eyes. I went from a teal, like a greenish teal, to a purple to a maroon. And then my lips have like a maroony pink. Maybe I could have done something different on the lips, but keeping it, it's fine. Today we discussed sea anemones. So we discussed their anatomy. We discussed some symbiotic relationships that are very important to the different sea anemones that live in the ocean. We discussed where they can live, which is pretty much anywhere. They do prefer, most sea anemones live near the equator, but they have been found in the Arctic. Some species have adapted to live in those cooler waters. We also discussed their diet. They are carnivorous. And then we talked about some fun facts that I learned while researching sea anemones. I do hope that you learned something or refreshed your memory about something regarding sea anemones. I also am so happy that you clicked to watch this video. I'm always happy to hear comments or even constructive criticism regarding my videos. So feel free to leave a comment, follow me on Instagram and send me a DM, whatever method you'd like to send along your constructive criticism or comments. That is completely fine with me. Hit me with a like, a subscribe, and share these videos with anybody that you think would be interested in having these interesting conversations about weird things while I do my makeup. With all of that being said, thank you again for being here, and don't forget to stay weird.